بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you everybody for coming tonight. We'll do again as usual the quick recap of from last time, and then go on to the next lesson inshallah. So last week we covered the Battle of Uhud and the careful planning, and I also covered some of the inconsistencies of the movie, The Message, with historical reality. I'll go through them if you like, it's for a bit of fun. So this is from the movie The Message, and this shows the Quraysh army in the distance, camped near Medina, and the Muslims are just standing there watching, looking out. They don't know how big the army is. They're waiting for the army to come so they know how big the army is, so they can raise their own army, which is nonsense because number one, they knew straight away as soon as the Qurayshis formed the army in Mecca, the news travelled straight away to Medina, and they had about 2 weeks to get ready for battle. Which is a difference between Uhud and Badr. And Badr, the Muslim army went out of Medina, not intending to fight a battle, but intending to capture a caravan. So they were lightly armed. Whereas at Uhud, the army was prepared for a battle, and had 2 weeks' notice, basically. So this is a Muslim rider coming up, and the point of view is from Medina itself. The Battle of Uhud began, and I mentioned Bani Abd Dar, the tribe of Bani Abd Dar, which is one of the tribes in Mecca that had been entrusted to carry the banner of the Qurayshi army. And at Uhud, 10 members of their tribe died. Each one was carrying the banner, would be killed. The next one from the same tribe would lift it up, and he would also get killed. Up to 10 people from the same family all killed. And this is the evidence that the Muslim army at Uhud, from the beginning, right from the very beginning, from the get-go, was dominant in the battlefield. Unlike as shown in the movie. Muslim morale was also very high. They had been victorious at Badr, and they knew that Allah was on their side, on the side of the Prophet. And I also mentioned Abu Dujana, the famous Abu Dujana, and something that I thought of after the lesson last time is that Abu Dujana, before the battle, was going around showing off his muscles and trying to scare the enemy. And something similar, which I think is similar to that, not exactly the same, is what the Maoris do with the haka dance. I'm sure you've seen that. They'll stand up, with like the chests will come out, and they would shout at the people who are watching them, and they'll stamp their feet and beat their chests just to scare the enemy. I think it's something similar to what Abu Dujana might have been doing. And he was even wearing a red piece of material around his head, showing that he was ready for fighting and for death, for killing. And what he did was scared the Qurayshi army. I also mentioned Wahshi, the African slave who killed Hamza. And this is from the movie, and this is, in my opinion, a fictional, the conversation between Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan, and Wahshi, because Wahshi was not her slave. She did not own him. She could not have promised him freedom and all that wealth. It was his own slave master, his own master, who promised him he would liberate him and give him all this money, freedom and all this money, because it was the master's, I think his uncle had died at Badr. I also mentioned Khalid ibn al-Walid, and the general, the plan, which was, I'm sure you all know, that's the Muslim army, that's the Qurayshi army. The plan was the Qurayshi cavalry under the leadership of Khalid ibn al-Walid would go around this hill, attack the Muslim army from the rear. And the Prophet saw this, and this is the genius of the Prophet. He assigned 50 archers onto the hill of the archers. And I mentioned also that the Khalid ibn al-Walid and his 100 horsemen, cavalry, tried 3 times unsuccessfully to go around the hill because they were each time met with arrows, deadly arrows, and they would have to retreat. It was only after the Muslim army started pushing back the Qurayshi army, and all this booty appeared. The booty of war. Weapons and armor and whatever, things of value. And the archers saw that, and the majority of them, not all of them, went off the hill to capture this booty. There were 50 archers, 40 of them went off this hill to capture the booty, 10 of them remained. And these archers had been given very strict, very precise instructions from the Prophet not to leave that hill no matter what happened, until they were given a new order by the Prophet. And yet they still disobeyed, and we'll find out what the implications of what they did, not only in Uhud, but for the next 6 months after Uhud, what this simple act of disobedience did. Another still from the movie, that's supposed to be Khalid bin Walid and the cavalry, and those are the archers. There were 10 archers left, and they came down to fight them, and they were all slaughtered by the cavalry. So they weren't 3 just standing there on top of the hill watching. They all killed. The remaining 10 were killed by the cavalry. Of course, this led to a disastrous situation with the cavalry coming around, attacking the Muslim army from behind. The Prophet was surrounded. Many of the non-Muslims, the Qurayshis came. They tried to surround him. Some Muslims started to trickle through, and they surrounded the Prophet himself to protect his life. And they did a lot of things which no ordinary human would be able to do. One Sahabi, Talha ibn Ubaidillah, I think, struck his hand out to protect the Prophet, and an arrow hit his hand. He saw the arrow coming, and he stuck his hand out. Just the arrow would hit his hand instead of hitting the Prophet. Another time, the Prophet fell into a pit that had been dug by the enemy, and the Prophet had been injured already, badly injured. He wasn't able to climb out easily. Abu Dujana came and covered the pit with his own body because he saw arrows coming. One of the arrows to hit his own body instead of hitting the body of the Prophet. And then one disastrous situation after another. Mus'ab ibn Umair was carrying the banner of the Muslim army, was killed by the Qurayshis. And because Mus'ab ibn Umair had a facial resemblance to the Prophet, the man who killed him said he thought he had killed Ibn Qam'a, thought he killed the Prophet, and he shouted, "I've killed Muhammad, I've killed him." And this spread throughout the entire battlefield. Muslims and non-Muslims heard the news. Now, some of the Muslims heard the news, and they were so distraught, so they just gave up on everything. Some of them just sat down on the battlefield, doing nothing. They didn't care what happened. They lost all purpose, all meaning to life. Some other Muslims started to run away from the battlefield. Soon afterwards, the Prophet, because the Prophet had not been killed, and he was trying to organize a retreat, an organized retreat, and he was calling out the Muslims to come and follow him. Some of the Muslims who still heard him, and they still ran away, which is something that was Allah recorded in the Quran, this verse. The Prophet is calling you from behind you, and they still didn't listen to him. The Prophet managed to escape the dangerous situation, and he was able to go on to climb Mount Uhud with 30 of his followers. Some of the Qurayshis tried to go after him, but they were pushed back. They tried to climb the mountain, and they were pushed back. Ubay ibn Khalaf was one of them. Ubay ibn Khalaf, he was a bit of a funny one, because he'd heard when the Prophet, I think, was back in Mecca, the Prophet said, "I will one day kill you." Ubay ibn Khalaf, of course, he believed him, but he still fought against him. It was at this point, Ubay ibn Khalaf was coming after the Prophet. The Prophet picked up a spear and threw it in the direction of Ubay ibn Khalaf. The spear didn't hit him, but it grazed him. I'm not sure where, in the arm or the face, but it was only a small graze, nothing to be worried about. But because of that, Ubay ibn Khalaf turned around stopped pursuing the Prophet. He went back to his camp, and he was hysterical, saying, Muhammad has killed me. Muhammad has killed me. And the people said, his own people said, what's wrong with you? He hasn't killed you, you're still alive. It is nothing, it's just a tiny scratch. And he says to them, he replies, even if Muhammad has spat on me, he's killed me. And then, as the Prophet predicted, within a few days, that scratch became infested, had an infection, and the infection spread and eventually killed him. After the Qurayshis in the end, the Qurayshis dominated the battlefield. The Prophet and the Sahaba, some 30 of the Sahaba were up on the mountain. The Qurayshis turned their attention to the Muslim dead on the battlefield. There were 70 Muslim shaheeds. And the women who had travelled with the Qurayshi army were going around mutilating the bodies of the dead Muslims, mutilating them by cutting off their ears and noses and making necklaces out of them. And of course, Hind was present, and she found the body of Hamza, and we all know what she did. She cut up his belly and tried to chew on the liver. And I briefly talked about why Uhud wasn't a proper victory for the Quraysh and not a proper defeat for the Muslims. There are a number of reasons, but the main reason is that Quraysh's main goal was to destroy Islam, to kill the Prophet, end the Islamic movement, and they completely failed. And that's the main reason why it wasn't a proper victory. And I will get back to this again because in this lesson, inshallah. They also, the tradition of the time was that a victorious army would occupy the battlefield for 3 days to show that they were victorious and they were not afraid of the enemy. Quraysh, after their mini victory, they left the battlefield the same day. Okay, that's a quick recap. We'll start off with today's lesson, inshallah. Okay. There were some benefits to the Battle of Uhud. Number one, it identified the true Muslims from the hypocrites. Now, before Uhud, the Battle of Uhud, when the Muslim army was marching out of Medina, the Muslim army was originally 1,000 strong. And just before they reached the battlefield, 300 of the army withdrew, 300 under the leadership of Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul. He gave an excuse that he was of the opinion that the Muslim army should have remained in Medina, defending Medina, instead of going out to fight the Quraysh at Uhud, outside of Medina. So this showed everybody who the hypocrites were. The Muslims also learned the consequences of disobeying Allah and His Prophet. And we discussed the disastrous situation at Uhud, where the Prophet's own life was at stake. And Allah has revealed in Surah Al-Ahzab, وَمَا كَانَ مُؤْمِنٍ إِذَا قَضَى اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ أَمْرًا أَن يَكُونَ لَهُمُ الْخِيَرَةُ. So Allah has decreed a matter. Muslims have no choice but to obey. You can't just say, I might, or may not. It's optional. It's not like that. Muslims also have recognized the danger of just being distracted by worldly things. So there's archers who went down from the hill, were distracted by a worldly thing. And they ignored everything, every instruction of the Prophet, even the instructions of their own group leader, and the effect was a disaster. And hopefully the Muslims also learn that the mistakes of a few people can affect a lot. And as what happened at Badr, at Uhud. A couple of the martyrs, well-known martyrs, is Hamza. One of them was Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, the uncle of the Prophet. Because he had converted to Islam, we know his name today. We remember him in a very, very fondly. We know that he was the uncle of not only the uncle of the Prophet, but he fought with the Prophet and he died as a shaheed, as a martyr. Had he not converted to Islam and he would have just lived his life of luxury in Mecca and lived and died, nobody would have remembered him. We would not know his name. For the last 1,400 years, people are mentioning his name in a good way. Another shaheed was Hamdallah ibn Abi Amir. Just before Uhud, he got married, and Iman, he went out to Uhud. He was in need of a purification bath, and he didn't take that bath. He went out to Uhud, he fought, and he died. When the Muslims went to bury him, they found his body was wet. And then when they buried him, the Prophet said the angels had come and washed his body for him. The angels themselves. And the Prophet called him Ghasil al-Malaika. Al-Usayrim ibn Amr ibn Thabit ibn Qais was a non-Muslim up until Uhud, the day of Uhud itself. He converted on the very same day that Muslim army marched out. He went out, fought, and died. And died as a shaheed. And this is somebody who had never prayed a single prayer in his entire life. And yet he went and fought and died as a shaheed. He got that, of course, you would get, as a shaheed, he goes to paradise. Now, the very next day, Quraysh was thinking now that they'd realized that they'd withdrawn too hastily from the battlefield. And as I said, there was the custom to stay there in the battlefield for 3 days, and they withdrew straight away. They realized none of their main objectives, most important objectives, had been achieved. So they were thinking they still had an army of mostly 3,000, not far from Medina. Now Medina was a short distance away. They should have just marched onto Medina and taken over the city. So the news reached the Prophet. The Prophet called a general mobilization. Not general mobilization. He mobilized the same army that had fought the previous day. Now, they were all true Muslims, and they all heeded the call straight away. Now, this is an army that was battered. They were tired. They were injured. Some of them had been killed. 70 of them had been killed at the previous day. They were just tired. And yet when the Prophet said, let's go, we have to go and fight, they listened to the Prophet and they went straight away. And Allah revealed some verses, these verses from the Quran, talking about them. Saying good things about them. Those who responded to the call of Allah and His Messenger after their injury, those of them who did good and were mindful of Allah will have a great reward. So this was a time when the service was needed. And they heeded the call. They responded to the call and marched out with the Prophet. And they went to a place called Hamra al-Asad, not far from Medina itself. From the mosque of the Prophet, it's only about 13 kilometers. Quraysh, they were sending messages to and forth, the two sides. And the message of the Prophet sent to Quraysh talked about the Muslim army and said Muhammad has raised a strong army, a big army, and they're coming to fight you. And that was when Quraysh had second thoughts and decided, no, it's not worth it. They decided not to go ahead and fight the Muslims at Hamra al-Asad, and they went all the way back to Mecca. The Prophet and the Muslims arrived at Hamra al-Asad and they occupied the place for 3 days. Now, the effects of Uhud on the prestige, on Muslim prestige. People everywhere started attacking the Muslims now. After Badr, they had that respect. People respected them. They knew them. They were a strong army, strong, not just any people. Now they had been defeated, the situation was the reverse. The hypocrites in Medina started attacking the Prophet and the Muslims. The Jews also were becoming more hostile, and the Bedouin tribes near Medina were becoming more and more hostile. And the first 6 months after Uhud, there were several crises. Several tribes of the Arab tribes were raised armies and threatened Medina. So the Prophet would send out an army here and there and to quell these tribes. Now, one particular tribe was the tribe of Bani Hudayl. The leader of that tribe was Abdullah ibn it wasn't Abdullah, it was Khalid ibn Sufyan. Now, the Prophet didn't send an army, he sent Abdullah ibn Unais to go and assassinate Khalid ibn Sufyan, because Khalid ibn Sufyan was threatening to march and to raise an army and attack the Muslims. So the Prophet wanted to have him get him assassinated, and he sent Abdullah ibn Unais. Abdullah ibn Unais said to the Prophet, I've never seen this Khalid ibn Sufyan before. I don't know what he looks like. So the Prophet gives him a sign. He says, when you see him, you're going to shake with fear, which was a very strange sign, because Abdullah ibn Unais said to the Prophet, I've never been afraid of anyone or anything in my entire life. And yet the Prophet said, when you see him, you're gonna feel that, you're gonna shake. So Abdullah ibn Unais travels to where the tribe is, and he sees him. He sees Khalid ibn Sufyan, ibn Khalid ibn Sufyan, and he wants to go. He's going towards him in his direction to kill him, and he's some distance away. But the problem was that it was time for the Dhuhr prayer. So Abdullah ibn Unais didn't want to stay there and risk getting maybe discovered, maybe captured. He had to do this quickly, assassination as quickly as possible. And it was time for the Dhuhr prayer, and he was afraid that if he were to kill this person, assassinate him, he would lose the prayer. So he made his own ijtihad, and he did the Dhuhr prayer while walking in the desert, towards killing that person. The Prophet when he heard this, he confirmed that this is correct. It's called the prayer of al-Talib al-Matlub. So basically walking and praying at the same time, for a particular reason, for whatever, Now, there was the crisis of Rajia. Now, there were several different tribes. They sent messengers to the Prophet asking him to send teachers to teach them, because they were saying they were interested in Islam. The tribes were interested in learning about Islam, maybe even converting. They needed teachers. So the Prophet sent 10 Sahabis, 10 people who were memorized the Quran and knew the religion very well. And on the way, those 10 Sahabis were attacked. So in the middle of the desert, 8 of them were killed, 2 were captured. Now the 2 who were captured by this tribe, the tribes of Bani Adal and Bani Qarra. They were captured and sold them to someone from Quraysh. So they ended up being taken all the way to Mecca. One of the 2 characters was Zayd ibn Dathinna, was killed by Safwan ibn Umayyah. Safwan ibn Umayyah was the son of Umayyah ibn Khalaf, the one who used to torture Bilal. He was killed in revenge. The other captive was Khubayb ibn Adi, who was taken to Mecca to be executed. Now, he was interesting because he asked them, his captors, before he got executed, for permission. He asked them to allow him to pray 2 rakahs. They permitted him. He made a quick dua. And now his captors, because he was in Mecca, they didn't want to kill him inside Mecca, because this was a sacred area. They took him out of Mecca to kill him outside of Mecca. They killed him. Now, there was one non-Muslim woman who's she had several sons had died. I'm not sure, Badr or Uhud. And she swore that she wanted to drink wine out of his skull, the skull of Khubayb ibn Adi. So the captors took him out of Mecca, they killed him, they left him, and with the intention of coming back later. They came back and found his body it was lying on the ground. A swarm of bees had covered his body. And they were too afraid to approach his body. They didn't want, because of all these bees above him. So they decided that we'll come back later. They came back later and found, instead of the place of the body, there was a stream of water. And the body had disappeared. The water had come, taken his body away to somewhere, nobody knew where. And this person, before he died, there was a dua he would say, Allahumma inni hamaytu dinak awwal an-nahar fahmi lahmi fi akhirih. I defended your religion at the beginning of the day, and please protect my flesh at the end of the day. That was his dua. Allah protected his dua, answered his dua. He died, and Allah saved his body from being mutilated, his skull being used as a drinking vessel for wine. So Allah protects people when they, the true Muslims, when they are sincere. Now I forgot to mention one of the other, I mentioned there were eight of those 10 Sahabis had been killed. One of those 8 was the leader, their leader. Before he was killed, he was taken captive, and in front of the captors, someone came from behind and stabbed him with a spear in the back, and the spear came out from his chest. And as he saw the spear, his blood, he took the blood, he wiped his face with it, and he says, "Fustu wa Rabb al-Kaaba," meaning I've won, I've made it, I'm successful. And the other people watching him, they're thinking, what a strange thing to say. He's been stabbed with a spear and he's dying. He's saying, I've made it, I'm victorious, I'm successful. It was so strange that later the person who stabbed him would later convert to Islam. It was just one of the very strange situation. Because he knew when he was dying, he died as a martyr, as a shaheed. Which is why he said, "Fustu wa Rabb al-Kaaba." Another tribe, Bani Amir, sent also a delegation to the Prophet, asking him to send teachers. Again, they're saying that we're interested in Islam, please send some teachers. And the Prophet ended up sending this time 70 teachers, because this was a big tribe, a very large tribe, in I think Najd, long distance away. Again, the same thing happened. This group of 70 in the middle of the desert, they were surrounded, they were slaughtered, massacred. And now, some of us may recall recently with Imam Konda, when we were doing Maghrib or even Isha prayer, we do a qunut at the end, within the prayer. This is where it began. The Prophet was so upset by this event, by the 70 people, Sahabis being killed. For one whole month, every single 5 prayers a day, he would make that qunut, make a dua against the people who massacred them. It's called qunut al-nawazil. Now, 2 innocent persons from Bani Amir, so not the whole entire tribe were evil, 2 innocent persons were traveling, and they even had written protection document, a letter saying that their lives were protected by the Prophet himself. However, one Muslim Sahabi found them, he knew they were from Bani Amir, and killed them. So he went to the Prophet and told him what had happened. The Prophet then was he was upset about the 70 Sahabis who had been killed, but he was now also upset that 2 innocent people, even though they were non-Muslims, had also been killed, and he tried to raise money to compensate for their deaths. He went to the Muslims, asked the Muslims to donate money. The Muslims were too poor to donate enough money, compensation money. So the Prophet then had to went to the Jews, to Bani Nadir, asked them to help out. Because the treaty that the Prophet had signed with the Jews, this is one of the terms of the treaty. If one side needed financial assistance for this sort of situation, the other side would assist and could donate money. So the Prophet went to Bani Nadir, one of the two remaining Jewish tribes in Medina. Now the Jewish tribes, there were originally 3 Jewish tribes. Each one of them had their own fortification, living inside a fortress. So it was not easy to fight them. The Prophet went to Bani Nadir, he went inside with a group of Sahabis, and he was sitting down with those Sahabis near a building. The people from Bani Nadir saw this as a golden opportunity to get rid of the Prophet. They hatched a plot to kill him. How? Somebody would climb on top of the building with a large rock, go to where the Prophet was sitting, and throw the rock onto the Prophet's head and kill him. The Prophet at that moment received revelation from Jibreel saying, this is what the Jews are intending to do. The Prophet excused himself, he got up and left. Then the other Sahabas followed him, and it was at that point the Prophet told the Sahabis what the Bani Nadir were planning to do. And this was an act of war. They were planning to kill the Prophet, assassinate him. So they formed an army and laid siege to Bani Nadir. Bani Nadir, as I said, so they're inside their fortification. They're well provisioned. They've got food, they've got weapons, they've got everything. It's just very, very difficult to fight them and conquer them. The Prophet still came, they laid siege to them. And Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul came, approached them. Actually, they were about to surrender after 6 days. He came to them and said, do not surrender, keep fighting. Do not surrender to them. So they kept on going. And Allah revealed some verses in the Quran about this particular encounter. Abdullah ibn Salih encouraging Bani Nadir to keep fighting. Surah Al-Hashr. So, have you not seen the hypocrites who say to their fellow disbelievers from the people of the book, if you are expelled, we will certainly leave with you. Basically, he's promising them, I will fight with you. I will have my own followers, I will fight with you. I will not let these Muslims come and defeat you and kill you. But Allah is saying, they are nothing but, they are cowards. If they are expelled, the Jews are expelled, the hypocrites will never leave with them. They will never help them. If they are fought against, the hypocrites will never help them. And even if the hypocrites did so, they will certainly flee, and then the believers would be left with no help. So it was at that point that Bani Nadir, after several days, they realized, Allah mentioned in the Quran that He placed fear, terror in the hearts of these Bani Nadir Jews. In the end, they were afraid of the Muslims, and they surrendered. They said, and the Prophet decided to expel them from Medina. So what did Bani Nadir do? They collected all their possessions. Not only they collect all their possessions and all their camels and everything, they even demolished their own homes. They dismantled their homes, took doors and windows with them. They wanted to leave nothing behind for the Muslims. And even Allah mentions that again. يُخْرِبُونَ بِيُوتًا بِأَيْدِيهِمْ وَأَيْدِي الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. So they destroyed their houses with their own hands and the hands of the believers. So this was finally after the end of that first 6 months after Uhud. This was a major victory. This restored a lot of that prestige that the Muslims had before Uhud. Because these Bani Nadir and the other Jews had a reputation for being strong fighters, and they had been defeated now. So Bani Nadir left Medina and went north and settled in Khaybar, a few kilometers, I don't know how many kilometers to the north of Medina. After that, the Prophet led an army to punish those Arab tribes that had sent messengers asking them to the Prophet to send teachers, and they ended up killing them. The Prophet sent out armies and fought them and brought them back under Muslim leadership, Muslim control. The other thing that is that Quraysh had made an agreement with the Muslims to fight another battle at Badr, 1 year after Uhud. So the Prophet sent out a message to Quraysh saying, are we meeting at battle or not? The Quraysh said yes. The Prophet marched out of Medina with an army of 1,500. Quraysh mustered an army of only 2,000. The Quraysh army, just after they left Mecca, they started, they had no motivation at all. They were completely hesitant. They thought they were going to go, they're going to get slaughtered or whatever. They decided to go back to Mecca. So this is known as the minor battle of Badr. The Muslims, of course, arrived at Badr and stayed there occupied Badr for 8 days. The Jews, again, we keep talking about the Jews. The Jews were now very unhappy with this Muslim power in the region and wanted to find a new way to get rid of it, destroy it. Huyay ibn al-Akhtab. Does anybody know who this person is? Huyay ibn al-Akhtab? The name ring a bell to anybody? Because he affected the Prophet's life in a very bad way and also in a good way as well. No? Okay. So Huyay ibn al-Akhtab was the leader of Bani Nadir, the tribe that got expelled. Huyay ibn al-Akhtab was the one who would go around to the various tribes around in Mecca and Arabian Peninsula, talking to them, bribing them with money to raise a new army to go fight the Muslims. Huyay ibn al-Akhtab hated the Prophet so much. His daughter was Safiya, the wife of the Prophet, radiallahu anha. Safiya bint Huyay ibn al-Akhtab. Sayyidina Safiya radiallahu anha is one story that she mentioned that soon after the Prophet arrived in Medina from Mecca, her father Huyay ibn al-Akhtab and her uncle went to meet with the Prophet. They were talking about religion and they stayed with him all day long. And when her father returned back to the house, she asked the father, what do you think of this person, this Muhammad? So Huyay said, I swear he is a true prophet. But there's going to be nothing but enmity, hatred between me and him. Huyay ibn al-Akhtab knew that the Prophet was a genuine prophet from Allah, and he still chose to fight him. Didn't want to follow him at all. So you remember that name, Huyay ibn Akhtab. He first went to Quraysh, and Quraysh were able to muster a new army of 4,000. He went to another tribe, Bani Ghatafan, another huge tribe, and again, they were able to muster 6,000. And they had to bribe them. They said, well, they give them money and also give them harvest, 1 year's harvest from Khaybar. So there's a new army now of 10,000 coming. They're going to march onto Medina with the intention of, this time, destroying Islam. Muslim reaction, the true Muslims said, هذا ما وعدنا الله ورسوله. Allah has mentioned that. They said, this is what Allah and His Messenger had promised us. Basically, that the people would fight against them. But they would stay true and they would fight, were willing to fight and die. Allah contrasted what the true believers said with what the hypocrites said. المنافقون الذين في قلوبهم مرض ما وعدنا الله ورسوله إلا غرورا. Allah's Messenger have promised us nothing but delusion. So their job, as they saw it, was to create, to demotivate the Muslims, create division amongst the Muslims, so the Muslims not be able to fight. In fact, this is one of the good things that at Uhud, just before Uhud, the 300 hypocrites who withdrew from the army of 1,000, this was a good thing, because had they stayed with them, they would have maybe caused an even worse situation. They would have helped the enemy army to defeat the Muslims. They were there to create disunity, to cause the Muslims to be defeated. So this was a good thing. So this, when the people of Medina heard about this new army coming, this is what the Muslims, true Muslims said, and what the hypocrites said. That Allah, their promises nothing but delusion. So inshallah next time we'll talk about Al-Ahzab and the various miracles of Al-Ahzab, and the decisions that had never been taken before, that were taken at Al-Ahzab. One of the miracles was the digging of the ditch itself. It was basically an impossibility that no ordinary human people could have dug that ditch. And we'll cover more detail inshallah next time. Any questions or comments from anybody? Or? Okay. ستذكرون ما أقول لكم فوض أمر الله سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.